Okay, so when you first open up Pro Tools, this is the window that you're gonna see. This is your edit window. To create a new track, what you're gonna do is you're gonna go up to the menu bar, you're gonna click on Track, and you're gonna click on New. When you do that, what comes up is your new track dialog box. It asks you a couple different things. The first thing it asks you is how many tracks do you want to create? Then the format of the track. Do you want the track to be mono or stereo? The next thing is the type of track. Do you want it to be an audio track, an auxiliary input, a master fader, a MIDI track, or do you want it to be an instrument track? The last thing that it asks you is the time base that you want. Do you want it to be sample based or do you want it to be tick based? What we're going to do right now is we're going to create all the tracks that we need for this lesson. We're going to leave everything at its defaults except for the master fader track. We're going to change the track format to stereo. And then once we have all that finished, we're going to hit the create button and we're going to create all 5 of those tracks. Now when you do that, you can see that in the edit window, some of the tracks look different than the others. The audio track, the MIDI track, and the instrument track all have empty space. The auxiliary input track and the master fader track both have a single line going through the center of the track. If we look at the mix window and you move the fader up and down for the auxiliary input or the master fader, you'll see that that black line moves down and up depending on which way you move the fader. Now if we go back to the edit window, you can see that unlike the audio track, the MIDI track and the instrument track, which is a MIDI track as well, they both have a keyboard on the side of the track. Those are some of the big physical differences between the different tracks in the edit window. Now let's look back at the mix window and let's look at the audio track first. The audio track does have an insert selector, it does have a send selector, and it does have an input and an output selector, which is the I/O. The next thing that you'll see is your automation mode selector. After that, you can group different tracks together with the group button. You do have pan controls where you can pan things left, you can pan things right, and anything in between. We do have a record enable button, a solo button, as well as a mute button. And last but not least, we do have our volume fader. Now let's look at the next track, which is an auxiliary input track, and you'll see that it has all the same features that an audio track has, except for a record enable button. The reason it doesn't have a record enable button is because you're not able to record audio onto this track, but you are able to record audio through this track. In the next part of our lesson, what we're going to be talking about is how you can utilize these different kinds of tracks and use them to their full potential. Now the next track is a MIDI track, which is data only. That's all that MIDI is that it's data. Now right off the bat, you can see that the MIDI track is a lot different than all the other tracks. It does not have an insert selector, it does not have a send selector, it does have inputs and outputs, but with the input selector, what you're selecting is not a microphone or any track on your interface. What you are selecting is the type of MIDI device that you are using. Now the next track is an instrument track, which is actually the MIDI track and the auxiliary input track combined. If you look at the MIDI track, you can see the little LED bar on the bottom right here is actually the same LED that is up here on the instrument track, as well as the input and output of the MIDI track are up here as well, along with the volume button and the pan button. Now the last track that we're going to look at is a master fader track, and what that does is that it controls the overall level of all of the audio tracks that you have in your session. So when you turn that volume down, it turns down the overall volume of all of the tracks. Now in the next part of this lesson, we're going to look at an actual session and how you would use different tracks for different purposes. We're going to learn why you would use an instrument track over a MIDI track, the proper way that you could use an auxiliary input track for different purposes. We're going to learn how to properly use an audio track and what we can do at the end with a master fader. So thanks for watching the video. We hoped you learned something. Let us know if you have any questions and we would love to answer them for you. And again, thanks for watching.